I want to thank you for collecting this information and sending it to us. I really appreciate it.
Well, you know, honestly, I don't do the work of collecting the information. The staff person that supports our legislative committee actually keeps the spreadsheet. So our ledge committee, that's our tracker. So it's really helpful.
Well, our thanks to him or her.
I will pass that along. William's great. So at the meeting today, we have Diana Bradrick, the county auditor, and Kelly Connor is our office coordinator. And then the rest of you want to introduce yourselves, please.
Okay, I'm Myra Ramos. I am one of the early members of Whatcom Fair Voting. At the moment, I am doing local politics with special care and attention to elections.
Okay. Janice?
Hi, my name is Jan Cottrell. I represent the League of Women Voters, and I've been an observer, and I'm coming back to the CEAC meeting for the first time in, I don't know, a year and a half or something. I'm glad to be here.
Okay. Andrew?
Excuse me. I don't know why I'm got a little catch there. Yes, Andrew Redding, I'm the chair of the Whatcom Democrats.
And Cam?
Cam Kirst, I'm representing the League of Women Voters. I work with registration and getting out the vote with a big group of volunteers that make it happen here in Whatcom County.
Stoney?
I'm Stoney Bird. I'm pretty active with Fair Vote Washington in support of ranked choice voting.
Okay. And Stacy?
Hi, I'm Stacy Henthorne. I'm the Chief Deputy Auditor. I've been in this position since 2020. Before that, I've worked in the office for 18 years as the recording licensing supervisor.
And Amy?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Amy Gracier. I'm the election supervisor, and I've worked in elections since 2013.
Hey, Amy.
Okay. So these meetings generally focus on the legislative issues of the year. And as I think you saw when we sent out the agenda, I sent out a full list of what we knew yesterday was the full list of elections legislation that had been introduced. And the list in the agenda is a much shorter list of the ones that the auditors are really focusing on that we think have the potential really of moving. We scheduled the meeting from 1 to 2. If we go past that, I have another commitment at 3. So that's the longest that we can do this. You may be really tired of this before we even get to that point, but
never.
So let me start at the top, and then if you've got questions about, if you're aware of any other legislation that's out there and you want to ask me questions about that, there'll be time to do that, and I'll respond as I have any information. But the first, so I've got these actually in numerical order. The first bill is 1226. That's concerning school district elections. And we're watching this one just to see where it goes. It doesn't really impact the auditors at all. It allows school district bond measures to pass with a simple majority of votes instead of 3/5 majority. And because we don't call the election for measures anymore, it's left up to we provide the results to the districts, and it's up to them to look at the results and say, yes, this passed or it didn't pass. This really has no impact on us other than just as a general awareness of what's going on with school district bonds. 1357 House Bill 1357 concerns voter pamphlets for overseas and service voters. And you may be aware, or you may not be aware, that we do not currently mail voter pamphlets to our overseas voters. We provide the voter pamphlet online and we give them the information about where they can go find it. But what we don't do is mail the hard copy. And this bill will require that voter pamphlets be sent to the UOCAVA voters, that's the uniform and overseas voters, that request one, either at the time the ballots are mailed or as soon as practical thereafter. And the reason that language is in there is that given the timing of voter pamphlets and UOCAVA ballots get mailed 45 days before election day. Our voter pamphlets aren't even done by then. And so we would be unable to mail a voter pamphlet with the ballot because it wouldn't be ready. It wouldn't be proofed and printed. We don't generally have our voter pamphlets. They're not really done until the week before regular ballots go in the mail. So the timing of this is challenging because there's a possibility that we mail it to them, but because of the mail delivery time, they still may not get it in time for the election. But this is allowing them to request it. So, and there's timing concerns in there, and we've expressed them. And then there would be some cost, but not, I don't believe the cost would be significant because I don't actually think that many UOCAVA voters are going to ask for a hard copy voter pamphlet anyway. But that's what, excuse me, that's what this one is doing. And if it's not, well, and then it was written in that it would become null and void if it wasn't funded. So there was a fiscal note attached to this, and the timing of the null and void was from, it was introduced last year. So yeah, if they don't fund to do it, it also won't go into effect. So that's what's going on with that. House Bill 1453 concerns voter pamphlets. So it's another voter pamphlet bill. And it's really a cleanup bill around the voter pamphlet language that creates uniform standards across state voter pamphlets and local voter pamphlets. And it creates new standards for candidate statements. So you may or may not be aware that when in the same bill that we were able to get the state to start paying even year costs, the trade-off was, okay, we want every county to send out local voter pamphlets. And you may or may not be aware that Whatcom actually was in the minority about producing a local voter pamphlet for every election. A lot of the counties were not providing written voter pamphlets. They would put candidate statements online, but they were not mailing a voter pamphlet. And Whatcom's been doing it forever, I think. And for most of the counties, for a lot of the counties, it was a funding issue. They just didn't have the budget and it wasn't funded. So part of the bill to get even your funding from the state was, okay, we want local governments all to do voter pamphlets. And so there was a more heightened awareness because now all 39 counties are having to produce voter pamphlets, and there became a heightened awareness that the requirements for a local voter pamphlet were not the same, and the rules around it were not the same as those for state pamphlets. So one of the big differences in this is local voter pamphlet rules for candidate statements state that a candidate statement is to speak to the candidate. So if I'm writing a candidate statement about myself, I'm supposed to be talking about myself in that candidate statement. What is my background? What are my priorities? What do I think needs to be addressed? My philosophy. What I'm not supposed to do is talk about my opponent. So, I'm not supposed to say, my opponent has done this, that, or the other thing, hasn't handled this correctly, doesn't have any experience, whatever it is you want to say about your opponent. That isn't what's supposed to be in a candidate statement. Now, that's in the local government rules. The state government voter pamphlet rules currently do not have that language, does not have that restriction. So the problem gets to be that those of us that take state government statements, like for legislative positions in a primary voter pamphlet, will get a statement that's been approved by the state that might not otherwise meet the local rules. And that happened quite a bit in 2020. So the thinking was that now we're all going to have to do voter pamphlets for all elections, and really those rules should be harmonized so that somebody that's submitting at the state level a statement doesn't get, it comes to the local government, and then local government says, well, I'm declining this statement because it doesn't meet local government rules, even though it's already been approved by the state. So that's part of what that's doing. And there's actually, interestingly, some resistance from the legislators about that. They want to be able to say whatever they want to say. So they don't like changing that language. So we don't know how far, that one's going to get. It would make it easier for auditors. We'd really like to have the rules be the same, and it'd be easier to administer it. It'd be more fair to the candidates, but we'll see where that ends up. This bill also requires that voter pamphlets be sent to UOCAVA voters if they request one. It requires more information on changes to state tax revenue to appear in the state voter pamphlet. So it's asking for some additional information in the state pamphlet. And it removes the requirement that information on advisory votes in the state voter pamphlet includes a list of legislators and how they voted on the underlying bill. So right now, currently there's a requirement that they print a lot of extra information in the state voter pamphlet, and it takes up a lot of room, and they're removing the requirement for that. So we'll see where that ends up. 1618, House Bill 1618 prohibits weapons at election-related offices and facilitates election-related offices and facilities subject to limited exemptions for law enforcement officers and security personnel. So if you're one of the members of the public that thinks that that law already exists and people aren't allowed to bring weapons into an election center, in fact, that isn't the case, and there's no law that prohibits it. In a courthouse, the only requirement, legal restriction, is specific to courts. And so our security screening keeps people from taking any kind of weapon into the courts or up into the judicial area, but it doesn't, if you've been in our office, you notice that you can come into the courthouse and you can walk right into my office and there's no security screening at all. So basically it's keeping firearms was at the top of the list, but it's any other weapon from being carried onto or possessed in vote centers, student engagement hubs, or the county election offices. The exemption would be made for law enforcement, of course. So the sheriff or the city police or whoever that bear weapons would be able to come in, or security guards that have weapons would be allowed. The auditors are monitoring this one. It may or may not surprise you to know that the Auditors Association is split on this issue. I am vocally in support of it, and so are about half of the association. And the other half of the association do not want their rights to bear arms to be taken away. So, you know, we don't know where this one is going to go. There was a public hearing on this bill, so we'll see if it moves.
Well, thanks for your position on that.
No kidding.
You
Yeah,
bet.
I feel pretty strongly about it, but
No kidding.
and so do a lot of us, but interesting. I was surprised, and I shouldn't have been maybe. And it wasn't, it actually was not, this is not a bill that was proposed by the auditors.
Right.
This was proposed by a legislator out of Snohomish County, and he worked with Garth Fell, who's the auditor in Snohomish, on this one, and Garth supports it and I support it, and so do a lot of the auditors, but interestingly, a lot of auditors don't, because they have weapons permits and they don't want that right to be taken away. So I don't know where that's going to end up. House Bill 1652 concerns conservation district elections. And again, this doesn't, it only impacts auditors to the extent that if this bill passes, we would be running the elections for the conservation district. So it would be just one more district that would appear on the ballot. But you may be aware, or maybe not, that conservation districts right now run their own election. And so in Whatcom, I think by statute, that election happens in March. The conservation district runs it themselves. They do their own announcement on their website. People have to request a ballot or show up and ask for a ballot. And our activity in the conservation district elections for the last few years, except in 20 during COVID, I don't think we did it in 21 either. They had asked us to count their ballots for them, and they contract with us to do that. And I wouldn't do it during COVID because it meant having people sit in relatively close proximity counting ballots. And I wasn't going to ask the staff to do that, so we didn't do it. But they've asked us, I think, to count their ballots for them this year. So they bring us the ballots and we count the ballots and give them the tally, and the entire rest of the process is theirs. That's how it currently works. This bill would move conservation district elections to only occur in odd years during a month designated by the State Conservation Commission. The supervisor terms would last 4 years instead of 3, so it changes the length of term. And it would allow conservation districts to choose to move their elections under RCW 29A, although the elections would not require a primary and the candidate would not be subject to PDC disclosure requirements. So the district could choose to have us run their election for them, but they don't have to. And the reason for a lot of the districts why they don't have us running their elections totally for them is the expense. It's very expensive to run a one district election. And particularly countywide, it's huge. And so there's a real financial impact for them. But, you know, if they choose to have us run their elections, then we would do it like we would run it for any other district. And yeah, so I don't have any information. I don't know if there's even been a hearing on that one or not, but this one has been talked about quite a bit in certain areas of the state.
Andrew has a question.
Andrew.
Yes, I was wondering, is there anything in that bill that would provide financial support to the districts to be able to make that feasible?
I do not believe so.
That's a shame. We've been wanting them to be added to the regular ballot for some time, just to, you know, as a democratic thing to make it really fair to all the voters.
Right.
Now you have to go through this whole big rigmarole of requesting a ballot.
Yeah.
And these make it very low turnout elections, and that's a pity.
Yeah. But I don't, when I read it, I don't remember there being anything that said, well, this is how it's going to get funded. So I don't think there's money being given by the state to do this. That's why they're leaving it up to the conservation district, whether they want us to do it or not.
And Myra has a question.
Myra.
Yes, it looks similar to Bill 1910 that's going to be coming up shortly. Perhaps you can compare those two bills.
Well, the difference between the two, if we jump down to 1910, which wasn't on the list, is that across the board, it just moves the conservation districts to 29A. So it's not local option, this is how you're going to run the election.
Ah.
And it's elections every other year during even years. Makes all 5 supervisors elected and changes their terms to 4 years instead of 3. Allows for conservation districts to apply for a waiver from Secretary of State for a one-time exemption from conducting normal elections for cost reasons. So that's what this one does. So the one I just talked about makes it local option if they're even going to have us do it under 29A. This one basically requires them to do it under 29A unless they get a financial exemption.
And
So
but there's still no funding.
No. That's why they have the ability to request an exemption for financial reasons, because funding isn't being given them to do it. 1716, House Bill 1716 is one that the auditors proposed. So of course we're supporting it. And it has to do with locations at which ballots may be cast. There's a couple of things that this does. The first one is that it ends the requirement that counties open vote centers during special elections when the county doesn't have an election.
Huh.
So currently, I'm sorry, I'm having to think about how this came about. It was with same-day voter registration. So it was an unintended consequence of same-day voter registration. So when the law changed around same-day voter registration and it talked about the office, the election center being open until 8 o'clock on election day, and that voters could register to vote at any county for any other county. So somebody from King County that happens to be in Whatcom can come in here and register to vote and access a ballot. The way that all got written up, the unintended consequence meant that all of the election centers had to be open for every election, regardless of whether you were holding one or not. So last year, during the normal April special election, when Whatcom didn't have a special election in April, I ended up paying staff to work until 8 o'clock that evening with the doors open for nobody, of course, to come in. And it's just an unintended consequence of the language in the bill. And so that piece of it is a cleanup. Mm-hmm. That we would say, if you're, you have to be available to register voters from other counties and issue them a ballot if you're otherwise running an election and you're open anyway. But if you're not running an election, there's no requirement to be open. That's what it's doing. The other thing that it's doing, and this doesn't really impact Whatcom County, but it alters the requirements around where vote centers have to be placed. For counties that have election centers that are not in their county building. So Thurston County is an example. Thurston County Auditor is in the courthouse building, the county building,
but her election center is less than a mile away.
Ooh.
And the way the law currently reads, she has to run an election center in her office and have and then she's got an official election center. And so it means having to staff and fund 2 facilities that are in very close proximity. And what this is saying is if you've got if your election center is located in a different facility, and several of the counties have that, they got their, they needed more space and they got their additional space in another facility. It means they don't have to have both things open. So it's a more reasonable, siting of where your election center would have to be. The third thing this is doing is it's establishing a 100-foot non-electioneering perimeter around the entrance to the vote center. And I think this came out in response to what went on in 2020, because the way the law currently read, you couldn't electioneer within 20 feet, which meant a lot of us, including Whatcom, we had electioneering going on right outside on the steps entering the rotunda. And so any voter coming in is running the gauntlet of crowds of people standing out there with signs and chanting and whatever all they were doing. They weren't being abusive at all, but they're just sort of there in the way. So this basically says you have to stay 100 feet away. It doesn't change the distance from the drop boxes, but it changes the distance from the vote center. So it's really doing 3 things. It's the electioneering statute, it's where a vote center has to be, and it's cleaning up not being open when you're not running an election.
Diana?
Yeah.
What is the distance from the drop boxes?
20 feet. It's not much.
Yeah.
1727. If you have a question, because I'm not able to see all of you, so I can't see if you've got your hand up or whatever the way this is. So just holler out if you need.
Okay.
Yeah, that works. 1727 concerns odd numbered year elections. And this one eliminates, so the auditors are really watching this closely, and there was public hearing on it yesterday. It eliminates regularly scheduled odd year elections while keeping election dates in odd years as potential special election dates. So what it's really doing is it's eliminating the primary and general elections in odd years. The special elections that happen in February and April, which are generally school districts and fires for their levies and bonds, they could still do those in odd years. Jurisdictions would be required to move to even year elections by 2028, so they could choose to move as soon as 2024. So Whatcom County, as an example, who by county charter has their offices on the ballot in odd years, would be required to adjust that so that would run in even years along with everybody else. It eliminates, there's a short list of what could run in odd years. So the special elections in February and April could run. The need to fill vacancies in legislative positions so they would be special purpose elections would be able to be run. Initiatives and referenda would not, the way it's currently written, would not be able to go in odd years. So you'd only have those in even years. The testimony yesterday for those who were not in favor were primarily focused on the idea that they wouldn't be able to do referenda and initiatives in odd years. They want to be able to do those every year. The auditors, there's a really hefty fiscal note on this. The concern for the auditors is if you may or may not be aware that the elections operations are funded by billing for elections. So we bill the districts. General fund does not pay, county general fund does not pay 100% for running the election. So all of the election costs, hardware, software maintenance, what I get charged for facilities, the phones, the full-time staff, that all gets billed out to the election on a proportional basis. That's in addition to the direct costs. So if you don't have an election, you don't have printing, mailing, processing costs. You don't have temporary help costs. You don't need an opening board. You're not opening drop boxes. All of those costs get avoided. But you still need, you've still got an operation going on with full-time staff and equipment and all of those costs. And without that revenue coming in, that cost all gets shoved to the county. The probably unintended consequence, if anybody is tracking and paying any attention, and I don't know that the proponents are paying attention, but one of the concerns would be that is the county going to fund an operation 100% when in fact you're really not running elections. You know, the election work would be very minimal in odd years with this piece of legislation. Voter registration would still need to happen, but your two major elections a year where you do the majority of your billing wouldn't happen. And then, you know, are you going to retain fully trained, experienced, certified staff? And are they going to keep their skills up if they're not actually administering elections every year? And are you going to be able to retain the temporary help that right now we get back year after year after year after year, and they come and they work the primary and the general every year? Well, now you'd be needing temporary help every other year. They would lose their skills. You may not even get them back because they don't have a regular employment. So those are concerns about that. Plus, there are some costs associated with it, one of which is the federal requirement that you contact voters at least once a year. So we meet that requirement because we mail every voter a ballot. So we basically are verifying their address multiple times a year. Anytime there's a countywide election, every single voter is getting at least one piece of mail, and that's their ballot. And if it's undeliverable, we get that information back. So that's a lot of how we maintain the currency of our voter registration database. If you're not mailing ballots every year to every voter, you now have to do something to reach out to those voters, which means doing a special mailing. So we'd be doing a mailing in odd years, and at an estimated $1 per card for mailing it out and paying the return postage for it to come back and the processing time and whatever, we'd be paying $160,000 in odd years that we don't currently pay. It's a whole new process. So that's one of the things. So we did a fairly hefty fiscal note and said, here are what the costs are. The actual cost of running the election is a wash. You're going to move those costs from the odd years to the even years. So, it's like, well, you're only doing one general every 2 years. The downside to that is that it probably would be a 2-card ballot, which means 4 pages. So that's hard for voters, I think, to have that much on a ballot, and that costs more. There's other things that you're only doing once, however. So you're on a 2-year cycle. So we didn't really see the actual election cost going up in terms of that, but there's other shifts in revenue and expenses. So the argument for this, you may be aware of, is, and the people that testified in favor of it all testified of studies that say that voter turnout is increased.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there's some discussion about that to be had, because typically, if you look at a trend, it goes up in the presidential year, it goes down in the off year, it goes up in the mid-year, even year, it goes back down again. So it always goes up and down and up and down. The presumption is that people who don't turn out for the odd year elections would turn out for the even year elections, but also the presumption is that they're actually going to vote all the way down ballot. So they would vote on everything to the back of page 4 where the cemetery district shows up. And that hasn't been studied. The amount of undervoting we haven't seen studies on. They just know that in even years, voter turnout generally is higher. So that's the reason for it. And so, you know, the auditors are, I mean, we're neutral on the policy, but I think there are some very serious fiscal notes and the concern about retaining trained staff. In order to run good, clean, accurate, efficient elections, it requires experienced, trained, fully trained, certified staff. And it's one of the reasons our elections run so well. And if we can't retain them, or we get short-staffed, so in the years where we are running all the elections, we're more reliant on temporary help because we've had to reduce our permanent certified staff. There's a concern about that. So there's, you know, that one is hard to put numbers on, but it just has to do with the integrity of the process and people keeping their skills up and us being able to retain them. So that is 1716. So I don't know how far it's going to get, but like I said, there was a public hearing on it yesterday. Sorry, that was 1727. That's the odd year elections. 1876 concerns independent forensic election audits at the direction of the legislature. The auditors are watching this, this wasn't proposed by us. It doesn't necessarily, well, it impacts us in that one of the things about it is that it increases the default retention of documents and materials related to a specific election from 60 days to 3 years. Now, I can tell you that if Whatcom County had to retain all of their election materials for every election we do for 3 years, we're going to be spending a whole bunch of money on storage because it doesn't exist in the county. So we'd be having to rent storage facilities because the record center doesn't have the space and I don't. You know, right now for most of our, unless it's a federal election, federal elections right now we retain for 23 months and everything else we retain for 60 days. So we're generally able to recycle the elections when they're not federal. And, you know, by the time the next election comes along, we're able to we're able to pull those records. And so we can maintain the same amount of storage space that we've got. But if we really had to start keeping everything for 3 years, and that would be statewide. So the impact statewide, just from a fiscal perspective, would be pretty heavy.
So Diana, I think you've moved on to 1884.
Oh, I did move on to 1884. Sorry.
1876.
Well, but she was talking about
1884 is the independent forensic election. So we don't know where that one's going to go. But 1876 is the public investment impact disclosures, and that's another one. There's been a public hearing on this. We're neutral on it. It requires that the state ballot measure impact taxes or fees would include a statement in the ballot title. And that doesn't really impact us. We'd be adding one more line to the ballot title and it doesn't really do anything. I mean, from our perspective in terms of work or cost or whatever. So we're just watching it to see if we're going to need to do that. And then 1953, exempting sensitive voters.
Before you leave 1884,
yeah.
or were you going to talk? did you mean to be talking about 1884? Or I see there's no indication of what the auditors think for that one, for example. What does that mean?
It means that there are bills that the auditors analysis of the bill thinks that it isn't going to go anywhere at all, and so we didn't bother to even mark a position.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks.
1953 is, and the Secretary of State introduced this one. The auditors are supporting it. It exempts the signatures and contact information on ballot envelopes, ballot declarations, and signature challenge letters from public disclosure. The Secretary of State may allow for public inspection. So one of the issues around this is public disclosure, and we've had them this year, public disclosure requests that come in, and they want all the envelope faces. And for those of us that have electronic ballot sorters, that have ballot sorters that capture the image of the ballot envelope, not the ballot envelope. If somebody comes in and requests that they want to see all of the returned ballot envelopes and they want them electronically, the way the language was, there was no prohibition from us having to release them, which means that you've now released an electronic copy of every signature on every envelope.
Cool.
And it also would include the phone number and email address if the voter chose to put those on the envelope, which currently off the public, off of the voter registration record is not disclosable. We don't disclose it. So the Secretary of State did an emergency whack on this so that we didn't have to disclose it. If people wanted to see them, they could come in and inspect. So they could come in and manually look at the envelopes if all they really wanted to do was look at them, but they would be prohibited from making copies, taking pictures, writing down notes, anything. All they could do is come in and look. And what this piece of legislation does is it gets it into RCW that those like ballots are, they're not disclosable, and they, you know, they include sensitive information. And there was just a real concern about having all those electronic signatures kind of out there, plus people's contact information. So the auditors are worked with the Secretary of State on this one, and of course we're supporting it. And there's an executive hearing on the 27th on this one. $5148 concerns harassment of election officials, makes it a Class C felony to harass an election official while they're performing their official duties, or because of a decision they made while performing their official duties. Makes election officials who are targets of harassment eligible for the address confidentiality program. That one has passed out of the committee, the Senate committee. I think most of the auditors in the state have, since 2020, have had some level of what might be interpreted as harassment, including me. So, you know, and in some cases it's much, you know, some people have dealt with a lot worse than I have, but what this basically says is you don't get to come in and harass the election official because you don't agree. You know, we were getting harassed because people didn't like the outcome of the election.
What about your staff, Diana?
Well, they're election officials too.
Yes.
Anybody that's working, it's everybody. It's all, you know, it's anybody that's an election official is anybody that is an election administrator. So it would be not only the elected official, but the staff as well.
No, I understand, but were your staff harassed?
You know, I think they get the odd member of the public that yells at them on the phone. I don't think they dealt with the same level of harassment where you've got somebody calling you names and, you know, coming back and you're a big fat liar and we don't trust the way you ran the election. And, you know, that they're not doing that to the staff as much as they're doing it to the electeds. But, yeah. So so we'll see where that goes. 5342 is irrigation district elections. That's another one that makes changes to how the district can run the election that allows for vote by mail, more closely mirrors the process of regular elections. It doesn't move the process under the county auditor, so it doesn't really impact us. It's just one that we watch just because we're interested to see how districts are handling their elections.
What about 5182, the advisory votes?
We support it, but we're not watching it closely. We think it's not going to go anywhere.
Really? I hate those advisory votes.
Well, we don't like them either. And it's a policy decision in terms of, you know, do people really want to have them? Part of the problem that we have with advisory votes, not only do they lengthen the ballot, which for us can be, you know, we've had elections where it comes very close to, are we going to be able to fit this all on one piece of paper? Because we've got 15 advisory votes with all that text, it really lengthens the ballot. The other thing it does is it puts the advisory votes ahead of the races, and that's statutory. So you're waiting, you know, you're waiting through 15 advisory votes before you get to voting for president or something. So, but I think, you know, it's not on our top list because we think it's not moving. So yeah.
Oh.
5540 concerning dates and timelines associated with the operation of state primary and elections. It is proposing moving the state primary to May, back to May. Filing week would then move into January. So the primary would be the third Tuesday in May. Moves candidate filing to the week of the moves it to February. So it would be the fourth Monday in February. And then it makes some changes to precinct alteration process timing so that it only allows county legislative authorities to veto precinct changes proposed by the county auditor, but it requires a 45-day review period. So one of the things about moving the primary back is what it does to our windows to be able to make revisions to precincts, because there's windows around, if it's within this much, if it's this close to an election, you can't mess with the precinct. And so we've only got certain windows where we can make precinct adjustments. So moving the primary back eliminated a window that we've had for being able to do precincts. So it's helping adjust that. And then there's discussions about this one because we're trying to figure out what happens to the April election. Or are we running an April election on top of a primary? So there's some talk about that one.
So that you're aware, we're very opposed to that, because what it would in effect do is create practically a year-round, every year election cycle, where the only time you're out of an election cycle is really the rest of November and December. It's kind of the holidays, and then boom, you're right back into it again. You know, we've got—
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
Oh yeah.
Input.
You know, other countries look at, in Canada, they get 6 weeks to do their elections, right?
Yeah.
And that's it. And they don't allow campaigning outside of the 6 weeks. Here, we're going to make it year round. It's becoming
Yeah.
a national disease.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Okay, I hadn't heard that one. That's good input. Well, and we're not sure anyway, because the other thing it does is it impacts when legislators can do fundraising. And that's an issue for them. And so it's one of those, we're not sure whether, you know, is this going to be even embraced, because it shortens their ability to do fundraising. So I don't know where this one's going to go either.
And wouldn't it increase costs for candidates because they would be in active campaign for longer?
Well, you know, and I haven't heard that one either. I think part of what this is doing is it's harmonizing our primary election with what they do in Oregon and California. And the fact that August is a big holiday month, and so our people, you know, are people around even to vote, and so it, yeah. So they're looking at what other states are doing.
So I've studied the turnout by various age groups in the primary elections, and people under the age of 25, about half are registered to vote in Washington state, but only 4% of those actually vote in primaries because, and I'm assuming this is the reason, the ballot, they're away in August, they're away from school where they may have registered to vote, or away from home on vacation somewhere, and the ballots aren't forwarded. So they don't get their ballots. Of course they can't vote. So moving the primary out of August, or maybe into the school year, would probably increase the turnout from young people.
Have you studied the turnout from young people in any other election? They don't turn out in droves for the general election.
No, but they do much better during the general election.
Well, that's true. They do, yes. Their turnout is higher in the general election than it is in the primary.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we'll see, you know, where this one goes. Like I said, it did, there's an executive session on it next week. So I'll know more probably after that, whether anybody thinks it's moving. 5582 concerns the deadline for port commissions to send new district boundaries to the county auditor when expanding from 3 commissioners to 5. Again, this is a benefit to the auditors because it sets a timeline that works better for the auditor in terms of getting those district boundary changes. So it sets a deadline of January 1st so that the auditor has enough time to go in and do their precinct adjustments before filing it. So that's what that does. The 5583 requires the adjustment of census data for local redistricting to reflect the last known place of residence for incarcerated persons.
Right.
So it applies the state redistricting requirement that incarcerated persons be counted at their last known place of residence to local redistricting processes. Right now, although the data was available, local government was not required to use it. The state used it when they did the legislative congressional boundaries, but local districts weren't required to use it. And it has quite a huge impact on as would make sense, on counties that have state prisons in them, because they have such a high population. So they would have, and they wouldn't be, so this isn't going to go into effect this year. It's not going to impact the re-precincting, redistricting work that's going on right now, but it would impact the future if it passed. 5584, increasing representation and voter participation. It's ranked choice voting. So it's one of the variations of ranked choice voting, and it gives local jurisdictions the option to utilize ranked choice voting. So that has,
I think it was reintroduced looking the same as it looked last year. So it's come back again.
Yeah, that's the same as HB 1156.
The auditors, as you may know, we have it marked as neutral because we're neutral about the policy. We believe that the style of voting is a policy decision. So we're neutral on the policy, but we have continued to have serious concerns about the implementation. So that's the issue with that one. And we've provided feedback repeatedly about the timeline in the bill, and it continues not to get adjusted. So when I look at the timeline, it's like I can't get there from here. If the bill passed, because I don't have an election system that allows me to do it, I can't do it on the timeline that's in the bill. And that's one of the big concerns. The other one is that it allows for multiple.
Is that the main concern? Is that the main concern, Diana, the main implementation concern?
That one, and the fact that it allows for multiple versions of ranked choice voting. If there was one, if it started out with, we're going to do ranked choice voting like this, and there was a reasonable timeline, then the majority of the concerns about it would go away, because it would be, yes, we can do this. I mean, I continue to have concerns about voter education and having one race on the ballot that's ranked choice when nothing else is. But, there's ways to do that, and you can figure that out. But I can't figure it out if I can't do it. If a clear ballot doesn't have it and I can't get it in time to, it's like, really? So, I look at it and go, well, give me enough time to implement it. And then could we start with just one version instead of we're letting every district pick however they want to do it. And it can be one, it can be one. So the city can pick one race instead of the whole city doing it. So the city of Bellingham can come along and say, well, we're only going to do the mayor. We want to do ranked choice voting for the mayor. And, oh, by the way, we want to do it this way. And some other district comes along and says, well, we want to do it for, legislative position, but we want to do it this way. And now you're trying to figure out how to run 3 kinds of elections. That's the challenge. So it'd be odd, we've testified to that. We keep saying, could you just give us one way, pick one way, and let's try that, and then expand it or something, and give us extra.
When you say one way, do you mean I don't know whether you mean one way of doing single member ones, or do you mean the distinction between single member and multiple member districts?
Well, no, it's one way, meaning you can do it as, sorry, I'm not being very articulate because I can't think of the terms. There's multiple flavors of ranked choice voting, and your programming for it is different depending on how, and the bill is allowing for multiple versions of ranked choice voting. So it's not just, it allows for ranked choice voting, it allows for this kind of ranked choice voting and this kind of ranked choice voting and this kind of ranked choice voting.
Right, you can have what used to be several different ways of conducting what used to be called instant runoff voting.
Yes, okay, the instant runoff is, one of them.
And you can have several ways of conducting what we're now calling proportional ranked choice voting.
Right.
And I'm not able to assess the technical difficulty of doing them side by side, but that's a true statement. But
we would love to see a pilot or narrow the scope until we can do some, which would be the pilot, and then expand it. Would be what the auditor's preference would be. And there's another.
So a pilot in, say, one county in the state or something like that? Or do you mean a pilot for one city in Whatcom County?
Well, it could be that. It could be we're going to pilot it in one county. It could be that we're going to pilot it in one jurisdiction. It could be that we're going to pilot, let's do instant runoff voting this way. And so write the bill so that it narrows the scope of the type of ranked choice voting until you can sort of get it figured out.
Are you saying it would be easier if they had taken the approach of, say, what's happened in Maine or in Alaska, where it's forced ranked choice voting on all elections in the whole state?
Excuse me, I've always thought that would be easier. I mean, I don't know that that's Diana Bradrick speaking. I don't know if the other auditors agree with that, but I actually, and I've told Sharon Shoemake that when I talked to her, it's like, this would be way easier if it would just be everything's going to be ranked choice voting. And then we could just, okay, we'll shift over to ranked choice voting and off we go. Mm-hmm. One of the bills, and I don't think I have it on this list, it actually came from Sharon Shoemake as the lead on it, which was to do the presidential primary as ranked choice voting. And I sort of liked that because I thought that was a good pilot. It's statewide, it's defined how it would be done. So all the counties would be doing it the same way. It would be statewide, and it would be what I would call a pilot. It's like, okay, we're going to test it out. We'll get our feet wet doing this. Now, the auditors and the Secretary of State get concerned because you now have to upload your cast vote record to the state for them to do the tally. But my interpretation when I look at that is we're going to have to figure that out sooner or later. If you ever went to statewide ranked choice voting, you're going to have to figure out how to do the central count. So I don't know. I think the auditors just about lynched me because I said one day, well, I sort of like Sharon's bill. You know, they're looking at me like, really? And I said, well, here's what it does. It simplifies the definition of how you're going to do it. It's statewide. It's one race. Blah, blah, blah. Now, you know, are the parties going to think that ranked choice voting for the presidential primary is a good thing? I have no idea.
We're already on record of yes.
We don't know that. Okay. So, but that's the ranked choice voting discussion. It's like, I'd be less concerned about it if I knew, for one thing, I had enough time to implement it. And right now, the way the bill's written, I don't.
Diana, are you saying that your current equipment cannot handle ranked choice voting and you would have to buy some additional software or some such?
Yeah, for Clear Ballot to write ranked choice voting for Washington State is going to cost $1.2 million. And it's going to take them 2 years to develop it from when they're told what is needed. So the bill, as it's written, gives an implementation date that doesn't allow for that kind of development time. And certainly there's no money that goes along with it. So, you know, that was that was their current estimate. So, you know, now if it's, and you know, there's a real question there about who pays that 1.2 million. Is the first county that has to do ranked choice voting that goes to Clear Ballot and says, okay, I'm going to have to do ranked choice voting, and here's how it needs to work, and I need you to write this for me. Is Whatcom County going to pay 100% of 1.2 million? Or are they going to take that development cost and spread it across all of their Washington State customers? I mean, I have no idea. My sense is that the first county that has to do it is going to have to pay the development cost.
Yeah.
And King County investigated it because the city of Seattle, they thought that the city of Seattle, that they were going to get it on the ballot for the city of Seattle to do ranked choice voting. And so they did some research. I mean, Clear Ballot has been telling me for years that it's going to take them a couple of years to develop it. And I figured it was going to be well over $1 million. And King County did more research with them recently, and that's exactly what they came back with. They don't have it written. And someone told me that they're in the process of developing it for another state. So they're developing it in the way that state works, not necessarily how Washington State needs it to work.
Although then, if we knew what that state was, maybe we could be smart about it and see if we could just
piggyback
use the same system. Yeah.
I think somebody told me, I think it was Colorado, but that may not be right. It was a recent conversation, but that's
you know, that's the concern. So, but yes, I am telling you that there's a whole lot of money involved, and this bill does not have money in it to pay for us to buy a system to make it work. It just basically puts it in the lap of the auditor saying, here, you're going to have to go figure this out. And most of us don't have a system that's fully capable. So you have to have a system that can lay out the ballot correctly and generate the cast vote record. And then you have to be able to take that cast vote record and put it into another product to run the tally routines for ranked choice voting. Now, there's open source software that's free to do that, but the development for Clear Ballot is the cost that the county's going to have to bear.
Right. So is the 1.2 million over 2 years for a single county, or is it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know. I mean, my
counties?
guess is that the first county that goes to them, I mean, the first thing is, here's how this works. Clear Ballot is not just developing this to have it. They've told us repeatedly, until somebody tells us how it needs to work, because there's lots of variables.
Right.
You don't just develop it it's not like a voter registration system where you can go, okay, I'm going to develop a voter registration interface to work like this, because it's all pretty similar. This is so specific that what they've said is, we're not going to start developing it until we get a customer that comes to us and defines how they want it to operate. The 2 years is going to start from that. So the legislation would have to be passed, and a county would have to approach them and say, I want you to develop ranked choice voting for me. And I would not be going to them asking for that unless I knew that I had a jurisdiction that wanted to use it. So at that point, whoever the first customer is, Clear Ballot is going to say, okay, 2 years and 1.2 million. And if that gets spread across multiple counties would depend on if there are multiple counties at the same time that want to buy into that. Then I don't know what the proportional cost would be.
I mean, the thought that occurs to me is that this is a very good opportunity for Washington State to stand up and buy the, get the development done, and then there it is. And the counties don't have to pay much at all.
Well, the state doesn't, the Secretary of State's office is not in the business of developing and providing election systems, because there's only 17 of us that have Clear Ballot. There's another 17 counties that have other systems. So this same issue is true also for other, the counties that have Hart and the county that has Dominion. It's all different. So that's just the reality of how it sort of works. So we look at the bill and go, right now, today, I don't have the capability of doing ranked choice voting. So that's the number one concern for me. But I also would love to see the bill written in such a way that it only required one flavor of ranked choice voting. So that's where that is. And that's the feedback that I hear from the majority of the auditors. They want to make sure they have enough time to implement correctly, and they'd rather there be fewer optional methods.
And this is my messy room.
That's the input. 5597 concerns the Washington Voting Rights Act. Okay. It fleshes out some legal aspects of
cabinetry built in
the Voting Rights Act, allowing those filing complaints to be compensated by the jurisdiction for time spent assembling the complaint, establishes both a pre-clearance component and an elections database at the University of Washington to support the pre-clearance component. So this one really has to do with looking at complaints about
compression or stacking of minority, what's happening with districts, how are district lines being written, and how, you know, what is that impact on minority populations? Is it keeping people from being able to participate in the election process equitably, and some of those kinds of things, so that you could make a complaint and go in and take a look at how, you know, what is really going on with the district lines, to see if there's something that needs to be done there. And then do you need to rerun the election, or do you need to do a redistricting exercise? So that's what that one is doing. And the last one I have on my list concerns secure automatic voter registration. And the work for this bill really is with DOL, it's not with the auditors. So it overhauls the automatic voter registration process for Department of Licensing. It requires them to actively compare transactions to list of all registered voters and get them automatically. So they have to automatically register anybody that shows proof of citizenship, not just those who get an enhanced license or ID. And it makes similar changes to the process. So they would be, part of the bill requires that they would have to have signature pads for the voter. And there's a whole bunch of pieces in there about what DOL has to do when they're registering voters and what kind of notice they have to provide. It doesn't have anything to do with, you know, and then because we already get registration data from DOL. So this, I mean, this impacts us to the extent that the data we get from them may be cleaner. Certainly we'd love for them to have signature pads because we'd get better signatures from them. The voter themselves would have to actively identify that they are a citizen. Some of those other kinds of things. And there's this, so we're monitoring it. We're neutral on it because it's a DOL bill. So we're just watching it. It is scheduled for executive session.
What is HBE?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know what that acronym stands for.
Well,
I don't know, but it's a process at DOL. It's not in the auditor's office. So,
or maybe some other agency, maybe.
So those are the ones, this list are the ones that are moving, we think, may get traction this session. But is there anything else that you've heard about or that you've looked at, or if you looked at the longer list, do you have any questions about other legislation or where you think it's going? Or we've been busy doing, you know, we're doing, I chair the elections committee, so I sit on the legislative committee, and I've been busy doing fiscal notes for a number of these. So we're just, but it is a short session. So that's one of the reasons there's such a long list. But a lot of these that got introduced this year, because this session is short, they may just, you know, pop up again next year. So they'll sit out there and then they'll come back next year. So that's what's going on with the legislature.
Yeah, thank you.
In terms of redistricting, I talked a little bit about it. We're in the process of, we've got the new lines from the county, from the council, the county redistricting committee that did the council boundaries. So we have that. The state redistricting commission got their work done. It's sitting with the legislature. If you've looked at what they're proposing, Whatcom County would have one congressional district, which makes our life easier in terms of precincting. And
the legislative line doesn't change dramatically, but there are some changes. So the 30 days for the legislature not taking action on it and then it becomes permanent, that 30 days isn't up yet, but we're fairly confident that they are not going to go in and muck around with those recommended lines. So we think we know what the legislative line is. And we have lines from a couple of other smaller districts, but what happened this year because of COVID is that instead of getting the census data in January of 21, like we would have normally, we were supposed to have our redistricting for county council done by May, according to the county code. That presumed that we had the census data by January. We didn't. The census data did not come out until September. Oof. So, which meant that the state, so the legislative congressional boundaries all had to be redone in this very compressed timeline because the law didn't change for them having their work done. So they still had to be done by the 15th of November. So it really shortened up. I mean, they did their best to try and send stuff out and get public comment. I think they did get a lot of public comment, but it really shortened up being able to provide feedback to them. And what they said was, in terms of every other district, if you're not on the ballot in 2022, you don't have to have your district boundaries done by the end of the year. So anybody that was that's on the ballot this year, any district that's on the ballot this year had to have their redistricting done by December 31st. Otherwise, they don't have to have it done until November 15th. And what that means is that most of our small districts that have interior director districts, like the schools and the cities, they didn't have to have their redistricting done yet, so they didn't do it. I asked them to consider doing it early anyway, because it was going to help the re-precincting process, and I was pretty much ignored. So the upshot of that is that I'm re-precincting. We're going to be re-precincting now. Work has to be done by May 1st, so it's done in time for filing week in May. And it will take into consideration the council districts, the state lines, and the port, Amy, or the PUD? I forget which one had to go this year.
It's the PUD.
Okay, so we have the PUD. So we have the PUD, we have the county, we have the state, and one of the schools gave us theirs. Everybody else doesn't have to have theirs turned in until November. So the rest of the schools and the rest of the cities won't turn their stuff in until November, which means we'll be taking a look at that again to see if we need to adjust precincts to eliminate or reduce splits. And so we will be going through another re-precincting activity in 23. And that just is more fun than we can stand. It'll give us lots of practice though. So that's what's going on with re-precincting. And it's, it's a really compressed timeline, but we have to be able to get it before county council in April, and it takes 2 meetings. It gets introduced and then it gets heard, which means we have to have our work really done by April 1st, but really earlier than that, because we have to give our GIS cartographer time to get the maps drawn. So that's where that is. Questions about redistricting, re-precincting? Okay, so we will be we'll be coming up with the precincts. And again, the goal with the precincting is, one, we have to adjust precincts based on the council and legislative lines to make sure that there's only one council district, one legislative district in a precinct. We also need to look at precincts. We've got some that are right up against the 1,500 registered voter limit. So we need to reduce the size of those. We've got some precincts that ended up being really small because of annexations to the cities and where the ledge line was. So we're hoping that we can adjust those. We don't like having a precinct with 36 voters in it. And then we're looking at precincts to help reduce splits. It's really hard to administer when a precinct has 5 splits in it. So, so they'll be balancing. So the intent isn't necessarily to change every single precinct boundary. We'll change as many of them as we need to take care of those adjustments. So that's
you said 5 splits.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually had precincts with more than that, but you know, when you've got a precinct,
what is a split?
Well, a split is you have a precinct with X number of voters in it, but part of the precinct is in one water district and the rest of the precinct is in another water district. Part of the precinct is in a fire district, but the rest of it isn't in that fire district. And with all of those small taxing districts, if you don't move the lines of the precinct, you can end up with, you know, you'll have a portion of it in a cemetery district, a portion of it in a fire district, a portion of it in 2 different water districts, and a portion of it not in any of the above. And now you've got multiple splits. So you have, you know, you're sending, for that one precinct, you're sending 5 different ballot styles to the voters, and it's just more complicated to administer. So
Gotcha.
we try and redraw the precincts so that we don't have that happening. So, okay, that's re-precincting. So once we get the precinct lines adjusted, we will send those out to the party chairs and the parties, and they can take a look and see what we're doing. They'll be done in time. The new precinct lines will be done in time for PCO filing for this year, but because we're probably going to have to adjust precincts again in 23, that may have an impact on some of the PCOs because the line could move them out of their district potentially. So, what time is it? Okay. You may be aware or you may not be, if you've observed elections at all, if you've looked at the webcams, if you've been at different meetings that I've had, you know that we have a ballot sorter that we got with grant money in 2020. It's huge and we love it. So it takes up a really big footprint in the election center, but we've got a webcam that is pointing right at it. So if you've looked at the webcams, you can't miss it. And it really helps speed up our processing for intaking ballots and checking them in and being able to tell if the envelope is overweight or underweight, meaning it maybe has 2 ballots in it or it doesn't have any ballot in it. Kicks out ballots that aren't for this election, that aren't from our county. Cleanly puts them into exactly the size group that we want. So Aggie sets it for groups of 120 ballots and it creates groups of 120 ballots. And it takes an image of the front and back of the envelope and clips the signature in an automated way so that we can look at that online on screen when we do signature verification. We don't have to manually handle those envelopes. So I think that piece is better security. We think tracking is better, and it really speeded up the process. So we love it. So if you haven't seen it, you might want to go check out one of the webcams during this election. You can see Aggie operating the Agilis ballot sorter. We have a new drop box in Barkley, if you're not aware. We did that before this past general election. That was an old, it's a new location. It's a recycled box. In 2020, with grant money, we bought larger boxes for 2 locations that were frequently getting full and overflowing. So we bought them larger boxes and we took the medium-sized boxes, and one of them we put in Barkley. That had been on the list for a while. and we didn't install it. Debbie had looked at that location. We didn't install it because use of the drop boxes had dropped off with prepaid postage, but Dropbox usage is going back up again, which we like. We love it that voters use drop boxes. So Barclay was a good location, and it's really getting heavily used. So that ended up being a good pick. And that's all the news from elections. Are there things that people have questions about in terms of what we're doing?
Yeah, could I say two things, please?
Absolutely.
The first is that to thank you. I really appreciate your continuing to conduct these CEAC meetings. I think it is enormously important for this interaction between your office and those of us in the public who especially care about elections, and that especially that we've settled on a focus on the election legislation. I think that really anchors the meetings. It informs us. It's a really good use of the meeting time, it seems to me. And I just want to thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
That's number one. The second is, in the light of not everybody appreciating the work your office does,
Yeah,
I would like to propose to this group, to this meeting, if you're willing, I have a proposal for a little commendation that would read something like this. The Citizens Election Advisory Committee commends the Whatcom County Election Office, its staff, and volunteers for dedication, competence, fairness, accuracy, and transparency. That is my proposal.
I'll go for that.
You know, the staff would love that. I think they work really hard. The staff work really hard. And I think, like all of us, they start feeling underappreciated, you know. It's, although, you know, Aggie told us today, Aggie is one of the election workers. In fact, if you knew Jessie Smiley, Jessie left before the November election, and she was the coordinator upstairs, and her position has just been filled by Aggie. Aggie's been here for 2 years. Anyway, Aggie was saying today that we were talking about the phone calls, and she said, you know, most people, she said, they're really nice and they're really appreciative. So that was good to hear. She's not getting, you know, screamed at all the time.
That's a terrible thing. It's terrible.
I think they do start feeling like the slings and arrows end up overshadowing the roses, I guess is a good way to put it. So you know, thank you for recognizing what the department does, because we try really hard to provide good customer service, and we try really hard to make the election be accurate and transparent. And
we have
all
the best of the best. We have the best county and the best state. We do.
Well, thank you. We love you too. Seriously.
And I'm serious. If other people in the meeting would like to endorse this commendation, I would be happy to either reread it or send the text to be included in the minutes of the meeting and shared with the staff.
Yeah.
Yes, I would support that. This is Cam speaking. I work very closely with the auditor's office throughout the whole year, and I just echo what you said, and feel proud to put my name to it. So it's Cam Kirst, and I'm with the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. I'm Myra Ramos, and I hope the group would sign on, and I would send an email repeating the text for inclusion. I think you need to be supported and recognized and appreciated.
Hear, hear.
We appreciate that. It's been a challenging 2 years, and it isn't necessary.
And it may not get better.
It's not necessarily getting better. I'm waiting for the next lawsuit, although I told my staff today I'm a little bit, after a while, I just sort of go, okay, bring it on. Whatever. Because there's one that's still hanging out there, and we've been told that we're going to get sued by another group. And it just is. And we're getting inundated with public records requests, which are taking up. I mean, I don't mind people asking. They have a right to see records that are disclosable and that kind of thing. And I don't want to ever suggest that people don't have a right to do public records requests, but they're coming really fast and furious, and they're, in some cases, they're quite extensive, and they're taking a lot of time for us to pull the data. And the public records requests are informing the lawsuits in some cases. So that's taking a lot of time. Stacy does a lot of, helps me a lot with the public records requests and, trying to pull all that data and stuff. So that's just, it's just another piece of this is, it's just taking up a lot of staff time in a way that we never used to get requests like the ones we've been getting. So
that's probably part of the purpose.
Yeah. So it's just another time suck, but yeah, we're, we just keep moving on, and I've got the greatest staff. So
we want to keep them.
Yes, we do want to keep them. Yeah. And, they like elections. Aggie that we just promoted, she'd been splitting her time. When she was hired, she was 50% recording and 50% elections. And she's been working full-time in elections for about 3 months now. And she said she just loves it. And she does a great job. She's one that operates our ballot sorter. She learned how the ballot sorter worked, and she operates it. And she just thinks it's the greatest work. So we like having, people like that. So, but I do appreciate all of you, and certainly, getting ideas and feedback and what can we do better. We're always looking for ways to do better. We love the league. The league helps us with our outreach, and they're the interface with our youth voters.
Yeah.
They do so much work with the schools, and we really appreciate that. And in 2020, I just reached out to the league and said, can you help us?
It was fun. It was fun. We had a great
We would love to have you. And they said yes. It was lovely. We loved it. So yeah, it's cooperative, and we like that. But we are also always looking for, what can we do better, and what would be more helpful, and what do voters need. And outreach is one. It's like, what groups are we not reaching, and are there things we can do? So yeah. Anyway, that was my agenda for today. If you think of anything afterwards, certainly email me. We'll be putting the minutes. We took minutes this time, Stoney.
Okay.
Stoney was looking for the minutes from the last meeting. We didn't do minutes. So Kelly will post the minutes on the website. She also recorded it, so the recording will be out on the website, and we have an updated contact list, and we will be providing that to you, Stoney. You had asked for the contact list. We'll give you that.
Okay, thank you.
I think
I'm going to send my text in an email.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that.
And send whatever you've got, send it out to your contact, your interest groups. If you've got people that want to see stuff, certainly share it. We love it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. You guys have enjoyed the rest of the day.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye.